in Kubernetes. So there are projects like Cert Manager is using it and Bazel is using it, things like that. But I haven't heard much of other Kubernetes things yet. I know there's been discussions about pointing it at the Kubernetes repo, so I've done some testing with that just to make sure it doesn't blow up. However, as the query complexity gets more and more complicated, I have to get more data. So hopefully I haven't blown my GitHub quota limitations yet for what I'm querying, but it's pretty conservative on that stuff. Hope that answers your question.
And what might be your next step in terms of feature development?
The next step that I'm really excited about is leaderboards. So I would like to have leaderboards that reward contributors for positive behaviors. So for instance, how fast they do code review times, basically here are my 10 fastest code reviewers, but it has to be balanced appropriately with the 10 most comprehensive code reviewers, because I don't want to reward people just saying, yes, I am the fastest. But I also want thoughtful code reviews, and similarly top programmable top 10 lists is kind of the next place I'd like to go.
Do you have a sense for how long it should take a team to implement this if they wanted to start it on their own project? And sort of with that, is this a one-person task or is this a 2 or 3-person task?
So hopefully, to get started, it should only take maybe 15 minutes of your time. There is an example configuration for Kubernetes projects and an example configuration for other random open source projects. Kubernetes has its own prioritization label system, so that's why there's a specific one for Kubernetes. So there's already example YAML files. It's easy to get up and running locally. Our documentation is pretty clear. As long as you have Docker or Go, you should be able to get up and running locally. How you actually deploy it to production can get a little bit more complicated based on how you want to handle data persistence. We do support, so in case your job gets restarted, as it might happen in a Kubernetes cluster or Cloud Run, you want to be able to persist the GitHub cache somewhere. So we have a lot of options of SQL databases and disk or just plain memory. That's a little bit more complicated, but I would say probably 15 minutes to try it locally and see where you want to tune your queries. And you might spend the next day or two tuning your queries for what is appropriate for your project and figuring out your production deployment strategy. So,
Okay, good. Thanks. That's a good 15 minutes to your first hit of dopamine when things work out for you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, I've got a question about availability of training material, or unfortunately I see we missed the start of the video and I'd like to share it with the team. Is there video resources available about things you discussed now?
Not yet. There's just written documentation, there's no videos yet.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering, how have you seen Triage Party what has been the effect on morale for people working on the project, and as well as contributor relationships? Have you seen more contributors either join or become more engaged?
So I would say probably the biggest effect has been that we do a better job of keeping an open line of communication with our users. When people open issues, this is the opportunity for developers to learn from their users. Here are the rough edges, here are the use cases I didn't anticipate. And we were basically ignoring a lot of people for a long time. We didn't see these old issues. So I think we have definitely, we have a much better integration with the community since we've adopted this. For the people who are doing triage, it's much less of a painful process. They know they can just go to a web page, they can see their work for the morning and do their thing. As far as it has also enabled us to get the community involved with the weekly triage process. And so we've seen more of an uptake on that versus, like, we didn't even bother hosting a triage meeting before because it was so painful to just sit and triage everything on a weekly. But now that we can parallelize it, we can get the community together and make make light work of it. So definitely a lot more community interaction.
All right. Thank you so much. If you have other questions, we'll have a short question and answer at the end of the meeting, but I think it's time for us to move on to our SIG updates. So thank you so much, Thomas. This is really great. And personally, this is a very exciting project for me because I'm a big process nerd. So, all right. So first up, we have Stephen. Stephen here?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay. And slides inbound.
So Stephen's here for SIG release.
Hi, friends. All right. Cool. Oh. All right. My computer is doing stuff. Great. Okay. Okay. Hi. This is an update for SIG release. My mouse pad is doing weird stuff, so Lori is front and center on my computer.
As I should be.
Yes, yes. So first thing I wanted to mention actually is, since we're keying off of the triage party stuff, Lori has done some phenomenal work, and that's the reason she's actually up on our screen. Lori, as well as Marky, Marco, and Veronica, have been working on improving the overall posture of triage in SIG release and in Kubernetes. So we are working on actually getting that instance of Triage Party up and running for Kubernetes. We've been talking to working group Kate's Infra to get the appropriate resources, and I think the last mile, at least to get the thing standing, is to start a user account, a new Triage Party user account for GitHub, and attach a token to a Kubernetes cluster. So that is coming soon. And come on, Zoom. Why are we doing this? Okay, all right. It's ridiculous. Okay. So what have we been working on in the last few cycles? It has been a while since we had a chance to meet with you all, but we have been doing a ton of work within SIG release and the associated subprojects. So first off, as you know, we are chartered to do releases. We're responsible for the Kubernetes releases across both the dev cycle and minor releases. So we recently did the 116, 116.11, 117.7, and 118.4 patch releases. If you are on that patch release, includes packages that address a CNI plugin CVE. So if you were on previous versions, please work on getting upgraded so you can take advantage of those new packages. As Taylor mentioned, we are aware of some issues with trying to install older packages as a result of some seemingly misconfigurations for debs and RPMs. So the team is working on that. We want to make sure that the fix that we bring you is a comprehensive fix that actually re-enables older versions and not just is the next series is next in series of fixes. So stay tuned for more information on that. We'll be sending something more publicly as we get more details. So thank you for your patience in the meantime. We have the 119 release cycle is underway, is well underway. So Taylor gave that update a little earlier. I think the 119, and very quickly, I want to address some some emails from the 119 release cycle. The first time around, we went through quite a bit of conversation around how we should shift the schedule, what works best for everyone. During during the past few weeks, during the past month or so, we've seen a decline in contribution overall. So I think it was important for us to make a decision based on that, based on the responses that we've been receiving in the release team, around bug triage, around kept completion, and we made that decision to shift the cycle out 2 weeks to so the tentative release date for 119.0 will be August 25th, which coincidentally was pretty close. This recent edit was pretty close to the original edit that we had planned for the schedule. So yeah, so there are emails out for that if you want to see specifics and timeline shifts for that schedule. But for the patch releases, we have also laid down a monthly cadence for patch releases. We have been pretty consistently on a monthly cadence for about a year now, but we are going to start forecasting the release dates even further out. So right now we have an additional about 6 months noted on the schedule. So you should be aware of that schedule if you're not already. That is github.com/Kubernetes/sig release /patch-releases.md, and that's linked in the slides. We've also been working more tightly with the product security committee on CV handling. There are some process updates that both teams are working on, and documentation that's already starting to roll for that stuff. So you should see probably more announcements around that coming soon. Sorry. For teamwork and sustainability overall, as I mentioned, we did the extension of the 119 release cycle. We're always excited to see the amount of people who flow through the release team. It's one of my favorite sub projects in the community, and I think it's a lot of our it's a huge opportunity for new contributors when the shadow applications are open to get involved in the community in a really deep way. So we've seen over 60 community members, some new, some current, cycle through the release team over the last few cycles. We are working on activating sub-projects on a more official level for CI Signal, as well as Triage, as we had mentioned before, to ensure continuity across time for these projects. One of the big things that we're working on, definitely Lori is a part of this. Again, why she is on my screen, to ensure continuity for basically the processes that we have within the release team. I think that we build a body of knowledge over time with these newer contributors, with these continuing contributors on the release team, and we need to ensure that that knowledge that we build is sustainable, can be used across the release team as well as across the project overall. So CI Signal and bug triage are two areas that we've identified. And on the CI Signal side, I will give you some personnel updates as well towards the end of this. But for the bug triage side, I think the first plan of attack is Triage Party for Kubernetes, and what we want to help out with doing is essentially be the SIG and sub projects that dog food Triage Party for the project, and make it easier to provide that documentation about how to be effective with Triage Party in Kubernetes. So coming soon. We've established a contributor ladder for branch managers, which actually was recently rebranded, right? So the branch manager and patch release teams that you may be familiar with They have the same personnel, but they are now called release managers. So we have the release managers group, which is composed of the release managers and the release manager associates, which if you have been around the release team previously, those were branch manager shadows, right? So what we're essentially trying to do is establish this contributor ladder for people who are interested in release engineering and specifically have had time on the release team, so are familiar with our processes, and bringing them a little closer to how we build the tools, how we execute on the releases themselves. We've been working on iteratively transitioning from the bash fire that we all know and love, Anago and the GCB manager and the surrounding tools. So tools that were difficult to maintain because we had less active contributors and authors around that, and a lot less people willing to dive into, at my last count, probably around 6,000 lines of bash that handles the Kubernetes releases. So we have been working on transitioning that tooling over to Go. And we've had a lot of success in the last few cycles. We started off with the branch fast forward tool. We rewrote GCP Manager, which is essentially a wrapper for GCP substitutions and build submissions in Go. We are starting to break out the bash libraries that we have been using for the last few years in the project into discrete Go packages for reuse in Anago v2.
Hey, Stevens, sorry to interrupt, but you got to get moving.
Speed
you have
it up.
like a minute left. Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So much good content.
Yay. So we'll send an email out later around more in-depth SIG release news. So the plans for the upcoming cycles, we need continued community discussion on release on the 120 and the 2021 timelines. So you'll see emails from us come out around that. We're going to be working on a charter update, leadership refreshes for each of our team, sub-projects, co-chairs, continuing the work that we've been doing on refactoring and sustainability for our tooling, as well as our processes. So check out the KEP around annual support, which we've sent a few emails about previously. We have activated annual support from releases 119 and forward. So we want to talk about the retroactive enablement of annual support for 117, 116, 117, and 118. And how to find us.
Yeah. We have to get to go on to the next one, sorry.
Okay.
But everyone take a very pause at this slide and there's contact info.
Yes, and the slides are available inside of the notes.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's good to see how busy the release team is. Just lots of content. It's an idea factory. All right, moving to SIG apps with Ken Owens.
Thanks, Laurie. Give me a second to share my screen. So many tabs. Okay, can everybody see a slide deck? I'll take that as an affirmative. Okay, so the major things that we're working on in SIG apps. In collaboration with SIG Storage, we've been looking at what we can do to make the PVC resizing feature that's been implemented in SIG Storage and in the PVC and volume controllers and Kubelet work better with stateful set, because as it stands right now, the volume claim template for stateful set is immutable, meaning that there's no way to actually do a kind of graceful PVC update. And that's in flight. I'm kind of shepherding it, and a member of SIG Storage is working on kind of updating the KEP and pushing forward the implementation. Last week, another member of SIG Storage kind of wanted to, so in the design of stateful set, we purposefully made it not delete PVCs. The reason being...
sorry, I don't think we're getting your slides. We're
in the
still
template.
seeing the intro slide. So
Huh.
We're seeing the
Interesting.
template actually, the SIG update template.
Interesting.
yeah,
Okay, hold on. Let me do this. Maybe
yeah,
I
I
hit
wasn't.
the wrong window. My bad.
It's all right.
Continue remotely.
Seemed like you were going to content. We couldn't see it.
Yeah. Ha, ha, ha.
Should we move to the next one?
Nah, give me a second. I got this. Let me just
Okay.
get. Can you see it now? Do you see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
See stateful sets.
Yeah. Okay. So, okay. Cool. All right. So, PVC resizing, we were just talking about stateful set controller PVC deletion. So we purposely designed stateful set originally to not delete PVCs. Basically, if you delete a stateful set, there are many use cases for structured storage workloads where you'd want to leave the embedded block storage, Google persistent disk or Azure disk that's backing that storage available, even post-cluster deletion. And that was the more common use case. So we did not make stateful set delete PVCs by default. And really, like for the use case where you want to delete the PVCs associated with a stateful set, say like you were turning up a workload as part of a CI/CD process or for development workflow, you can use label selectors along with kubectl delete to pretty much delete all the PVCs associated with the stateful set with a one-line command. But it still isn't, for some users, because of those CI/CD use cases and because of those development workflows, they really want it to be built into the controller. So we're considering accepting a contribution to allow that to happen as an opt-in, not changing the default behavior. Moving on. So for daemon set, a couple of months back, Clayton offered a KEP for max surge. If you're familiar with how the deployment controller works, you can actually surge out the number of concurrent pod creations. And in order to kind of accelerate the deployment of things like any administrative workloads, so you could think of like CNI plugins or CSI plugins or any of those things. And to make them be able to update large clusters in a timely manner, we wanted to consider adding the max surge capability there. For PDB, we're still making progress onward to GA, and we hope to hit the deadline that we would be under given the new constraints in terms of the longevity for beta APIs. Cron job is a little bit more troubling because while we do have some people who are now volunteering to kind of do work on cron job to move it along toward GA, the work that needs to be done is relatively complicated. One of the prerequisites that we decided on for moving cron job to GA was integrating shared informers. And cron job and job, the batch workload controllers in general, work quite differently from the other workload controllers. So there's kind of a very large moat to jump over to be able to successfully contribute there. The maintainer of that API is currently working with someone to try to get us there, but there is significant risk that we may not be able to get cron job to GA and still be in compliance with the API promotion guidelines, which would mean that we would have to promote the existing API to V1 beta 2, something we'd really like to avoid because we really feel like that's not the best turnout for our users. So we feel like making people upgrade to something that isn't more stable and provides no new features is a loss for the community at all. And lastly, we're trying to figure out, and we need to collaborate with Signode on this, a path forward for the sidecars KEP. So the sidecars KEP was accepted by SIGApps and Signode. It was merged, work began on it, and as of last release, we had an alpha release ready to go out. But as we were trying to merge, Signode declined to take it at that point, saying that they weren't confident of the maintainership of the contribution at that time. And then let's go to how this affects you. So this doesn't affect core contributors as much, but in particular, the Istio project, which is not CNCF, and the Linkerd project, which is CNCF, we're depending on sidecars to make their sidecar injection work. At a high level, both of these projects provide a service mesh, and both of them use mutating webhooks to inject a sidecar containing a proxy into all pods that are labeled to be injected at pod creation time. The problem, there are a couple problems there. One, during pod lifecycle termination, kubelet will basically rip the network out from under the pod occasionally, which is not particularly graceful or low disruption. And two, with any workload that isn't run forever, basically job, cron job, anything that runs to completion, the sidecar will stop it from terminating appropriately at all. So sidecar injection really just doesn't work at all for them. And they're kind of looking for a path forward, like the Linkerd documentation had linked this KEP and this feature as the path forward for them. The open issue on the Istio project had said, like, this is the path forward that we would like to take. And right now, we don't have a viable path forward. So we need to collaborate with Signode and figure out what we can do to make these projects, to help our kind of sister projects in the community out. So things we could use. If anyone in the room is looking to contribute software engineering hours to help out with cron job GA, that would be great. And we need to just get in touch with Signode to figure out what the path forward is for sidecars. And here's the contact info. Janet, myself, Matt, and Adnan are all the chairs. We meet on Mondays at 9 a.m. Pacific time. We do a bug scrub, an issue scrub, generally speaking, every meeting, and we review open KEPs, open issues, and talk about the direction of the workloads API. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Ken. Moving on to Product Security Committee with Tim Allclair.
Hi, let me get my camera set up here. Can you see me? Yeah. Okay. And screen share. Sorry, one moment. All right, can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
All right. Hi, I'm Tim Allclair, one of the members of the Product Security Committee. So the Product Security Committee is a small group of people who triage incoming vulnerabilities to the Kubernetes project. We have this is kind of a small group because these are really sensitive issues, and so we generally keep them on a need-to-know basis. And so we just have a small group of people with initial access, and then we pull in experts as needed for specific vulnerabilities. I'll go into that a little more later in the slides. But we have some recent changes in the team. Unfortunately, Jordan is going to be stepping down, which we're all sad about, but he's made really great contributions to the project and has trained up me and Joel in issuing CVEs for the project. That's common vulnerability numerations or exposures. I can't quite remember, sorry. And then Craig and Swami are both going to be stepping up as full-time core team members, bringing us back up to 7 members, which is where we had set the goal at. And also Mo is Mo Khan from, you might recognize him from SIG-Auth, is going to be joining as a new associate member. So a little more about what we do. There's 2 ways that we ingest vulnerabilities. The first is through email to security@kubernetes.io. That's kind of our historic historically the way we've gotten vulnerability reports. But back in January, we launched a bug bounty program, which is now where we're getting the majority of our reports from, and kind of where we're steering new users to report vulnerabilities. And so we have an on-call rotation. It's a 1 week on-call from that core team that I just mentioned. And whoever's on call will kind of take these vulnerability reports as they come in. And actually, if it's coming in through HackerOne, HackerOne has an initial triage team that helps us to filter out a lot of the noise and kind of low quality or irrelevant reports. So by the time it gets to our team, it's a pretty high quality report that we do some initial triage from and see if it seems valid, or sometimes there's things that are kind of security relevant but working as intended, or sometimes it's a user education issue where, like, okay, we need to improve our documentation but not really a vulnerability. We then try and understand the impact to make sure we know really how we need to handle the vulnerability. This is where we start to pull in some of the trusted domain experts from the broader community. Then set the severity based on that. And that helps us decide how we want to proceed with actually addressing the vulnerability. We now have better internal issue tracking. We had a few things kind of slip through the cracks when we were managing everything by email. And so we've made some big improvements there. We update the reporter. So the security researcher or the person who initially reported the vulnerability, we try to keep them on the loop so they know kind of what our timeline is. A lot of the times people like to publish their own blog or information around the public disclosure. So we try and coordinate with them. For HackerOne reports, we issue a bounty going all the way up to, I think, $10,000 for a critical vulnerability in core Kubernetes. And then we kick off the incident response process, which I'm not going to go into here, but we do have all of this documented on our in the Kubernetes security repo. You'll find the link at the bottom there. So I mentioned the bug bounty launched in January, and we've been really happy with it so far. This is a graph that I pulled off of HackerOne that kind of shows the submissions that we've gotten. And initially, this might look bad, since we're now getting about, what is that, seventh or something of the initial submissions that we got. But a lot of these submissions are closed as duplicates or invalid or out of scope. And so the valid, you can't quite tell from this graph, but the valid submissions are actually holding fairly constant. So we're getting a much better signal to noise ratio. And just kind of another view of some of that data. We're getting approximately 3 valid reports a month. I'm actually not sure if there's a bunch of issues that are in the pipeline, so I'm not sure exactly how this is counted. But yeah, we have maybe approximately 3 reports a month that we have to deal with that keep us busy to varying degrees. Sometimes you can have a critical vulnerability that's really bad but really easy to fix, or you can have a medium vulnerability that's not quite as bad but really complicated to fix. It takes a lot more time. So there's kind of a bunch of different things that contribute to how much work it is and how hard it is to fix. So I can't talk about the specific vulnerabilities that we're working on, but there are a bunch of things that we're working on publicly. One, Stephen already mentioned that we're coordinating more closely with the SIG release team and to get better alignment around how we when we announce vulnerabilities and how we kind of line those up with releases so that we're announcing vulnerabilities at the time of release and can include the vulnerabilities in the release notes, rather than waiting for some time after the release to announce it and then saying, hopefully you've already upgraded. We're also trying to improve communication for embargoed vulnerabilities. So we have a distributors announcement list that gets pre-release vulnerability information for this is for basically companies and projects that are running Kubernetes on behalf of other people. And so we give those distributors of Kubernetes kind of a heads up so they can patch or be ready to patch when the vulnerability goes public. And historically, we've kind of done a fairly good job with critical and high vulnerabilities, but not as good with the low and medium severity vulnerabilities. So we're improving that process, trying to streamline that a little better and come up with better policies around that. And I think I already mentioned earlier, we're doing a better job of tracking the ongoing vulnerabilities internally and making sure that things don't slip through the cracks. So a certain amount of what we do is does need to be private by necessity, but we're really trying to get much better community involvement around the things that don't need to be private. So improvements to our process, how we communicate, trying to get more feedback on what we can do to improve our communication and process publicly. And also sometimes the follow-ups to vulnerabilities that happen in the public. So if this is something that you'd be interested in, we have a bunch of issues tagged with help wanted and good first issue on our security repo. That's the top link. Definitely looking for feedback on the whole process. And there's the Kubernetes security discuss group that we monitor. If you're interested in actually bug hunting, even if you're a regular contributor to Kubernetes, you can still be rewarded for reporting a vulnerability, unless you're on the product security committee. But for everyone else, hackerone.com/Kubernetes is where you can find the bug bounty. And then we're also talking about starting up a security process working group or SIG sub-project. And so keep an eye out for that and how we can get better engagement publicly with the community.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And moving on to our final presentation is John Bellamar for SIG architecture.
All right, hello everybody. Let me just share my screen here. All right. Well, is that showing up well? Looks like it. All right.
Yeah, we can see it.
So a little bit about what we've been up to in SIG architecture. So there's actually a number of sub-projects of SIG architecture, and so each one is relatively active. We have a lot of things going on. So we have 5 now. We added a new sub-project recently with the retirement of SIG PM. We took on this enhancement sub-project, and the idea of that sub-project is to manage the KEP process and make improvements to that process, and we're adding some tooling and automation around that. But what we did last cycle, or last, I don't know, 6 months or so, I'd say, we've been working on a lot of things around conformance. We have a conformance sub-project, and previously conformance tests actually had to rely on beta APIs because there were certain APIs that were simply that were required to run the end-to-end tests and stand up the cluster and have everything work that were beta. For instance, for example, the certificates API. So in 1.19, that will no longer be the case. The APIs that are required for a conformant cluster will all be GA. So this is important because the whole point, conformance should only apply to GA APIs. And so that was a sort of miss there that we are glad to be able to resolve. In addition, we have continued work on some other things in building out conformance tests for increasing the coverage, and we're working on some changes. I guess I can talk about that later. We've also introduced this production readiness review process, so I'm sure a number of people on the call have brushed up against this. Essentially, the idea is that when you are bringing a feature really to alpha, to beta, or to GA, there's different levels of production readiness we would expect out of that feature. And we want to make sure that all the bases are covered. So we ask some, essentially what this boils down to is a section in your CAP template where you answer a number of questions and those are reviewed. We also, as part of enhancements, we're reworking the CAP format to make it more flexible. It used to be a single MD file, and now it's actually a directory, so you can put images in there with your design. And the metadata that was at the top of the Markdown file is now a separate YAML file, and this is going to help us with our tooling and automation. Two other sub-projects we have are the code organization and API reviews. Those are ongoing processes of managing dependencies and, of course, of making sure that our APIs, new APIs, all adhere to our conventions, and those continue to go. Lastly, what was done recently, there's, along with SIG API machinery, there's a new working group, API expression working group, to work on additional documentation and improvements to all those API conventions. So things going on in 1.19 and future, we have a CAP out there that I believe is all implemented now to improve the clarity around the use of node role labels. As I mentioned earlier, API and code review continue with ongoing processes. In conformance, we've been working for quite some time now on reworking the way that the conformance tests work so that we can separate out how Kubernetes should behave, that is what defines what Kubernetes is, a conformant Kubernetes, from the tests that actually evaluate a given cluster. And this allows us some separate review processes, as well as it lays the groundwork for something else we're working on, which are our profiles. So right now, the only things that are subject to conformance are required features that have to be there in any cluster that's running. So that means things like RBAC, which is actually not something you need, isn't subject to conformance. However, we really want for RBAC to function the same way across different vendors' instances of Kubernetes. I think that in order for workloads to be portable, in order for manifests to be portable, we need that to work across different vendors in the same way. So the idea of profiles is a way to capture a set of conforming behaviors that are maybe optional in a given cluster, but if you implement them in that cluster, they should behave in this way and they should follow this profile. In production readiness sub-project, like I mentioned earlier, that's a new process. You fill those things in the KEP. In 1.19, we introduced that as a strongly recommended but not absolutely required. And if that all goes well, then in 1.20, we expect that for things graduating to GA for sure or beta, that we would want this as another type of review that needs to be done, similar to how API reviews are done. And I already mentioned CAP enhancement project. So the tooling for managing CAPs, approval of CAPs, creating new CAPs, all of that is underway.
I just want to note that we're 3 minutes to the end of the hour, and we have some announcements. So
I will do 1 more minute. All right, how these plans affect you? Big things are the CAPs in the production. CAPs will need the production readiness review. So you'll have to answer these questions. a lot of these things are things you probably, hopefully, have already thought of, but the idea is to prompt you if you haven't. The other thing is for the conformance, since we're changing a little bit the way it works, before long, we'll be reaching out to SIGs to help review the behaviors that we've defined and to define new behaviors that we, as not subject matter experts in every SIG, don't know how to define. And so we'll be reaching out and asking help with that. The way you write conformance tests will change a little bit in that process. And finally, like I said, we're going to try and make your life easier with better kept tools. You can contribute to any of those projects. We need enhancement subproject is new. We need people on there, and we need reviewers for all of these other things. Here's how you get to us. That's all.
All right, thank you. I'm not sure we'll have time for too many questions, but what I can do right now is thanks to all of our presenters. You did great, really interesting stuff that we're doing. In terms of announcements, we've got a new Twitter feed. Please follow it. It's Kubernetes contributors. An official announcement will be on the Kubernetes dev mailing list today. We have a host next month who's a new contributor, Sushmita Amarnath. She is a product manager, and she's been getting involved in some of the projects for the enhancements group. So we are always looking for new contributors to host this meeting. I think we have a few lined up for the next couple of months, but please ping us in the Contribex SIG if you would like to do so. And shout outs this month, you can read them all here. There's a lot of them, which is great because it's been kind of a tough time for people, but we still see each other and respect and support each other, which makes this community so great. And I guess we could wrap up. So the notes will be posted soon to the mailing list. So please take some time to update the agenda or comment before I send it. And I'm in Berlin, so I'll probably send it in a couple of hours before I go to sleep. So again, thank you for your time and see you at the next one.
Thank you, everybody. Great to see you all.
Great job, Lori. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How's it going? Oh, you're mute.